We're going to be looking at Acts chapter 12 today. Really, we're going to cover this whole thing as we look through it, but I have a question for you. How many of you have ever went to bed before and you climb in and you find your little comfortable spot and you get all cozy in your little spot? You find that little sweet spot, right? And you get all cozy in there and you start to almost drift off, and then this little thought creeps into the back of your head, right? How many of you have ever been there? And the next thing you know, another thought, and then another thought, and then you've got NASCAR 5000 going on in your head, and you can't even, there's no way you're going to sleep at this point, and you know, and then next thing you know, you realize you're so tense because all these things are going through your mind, and you can't even think, and you can't let alone sleep, and so it takes you forever, and then, finally, like another 6 hours later, your alarm clock goes off, and you finally had a half hour of sleep before it went up. Well, we're going to look at something interesting. I think we've all been there. I know there's sometimes that's happened to me, and it's so annoying, and it'll happen for a couple days in a row. I'll be thinking of something so much, and it just actually keeps you completely from being able to go to sleep. But we're going to look at an interesting thing that happens here in the scriptures with Peter, and we're going to look at the kind of faith that he really had in God and how much he knew that God was in control, and he realized he just needed to quit worrying because God is absolutely in control. And we're going to look at something here. We're going to look at a very good truth of a time when we can really see God being in control. How many of you guys know already what Acts chapter 12 is about? I'm sure a few of you probably have a good idea of what it is. If not, you'll never forget it today. So we're going to take a look at this. Hopefully you've already made your way there. If anyone needs a Bible, there's two up on this side if you want to take one with you and it'd be yours. If you don't have a Bible at home, but we have some that you can borrow up here as well. So if you don't have one, that'd be great. But yeah, we're going to look at Acts chapter 12, and this is a very good passage. I've taught on this before a couple times, but as I was preparing this, I realized how, I guess, kind of a little shallow I had taught on this, and so I guess, as we go along, we get a bigger understanding in things, and you start to really understand what's going on, and so I'm really hoping to break this down for you. But this occurs actually around 43 to 44 AD. So this is approximately 45 years after Christ had died that this takes place. And if you look there in chapter 12 and verse 1, it says, "Now about that time, Herod the king," how many of you guys know who Herod the king is? There's a lot of Herod the kings. Did you realize this? It's not really a name. It's kind of like a title that they got. So there was a lot of Herods. There was Herod the Great, who was the one that, didn't like Christ, was trying to, kill all the children and stop Christ from being born and all this kind of stuff. And then it goes all the way down through. And this Herod here, have you ever heard anything good about the Herods anyway? Not really. They always seemed to stir trouble and they hated the church. But anyway, so this Herod here that it talks about says, "Now about this time Herod, the king, stretched forth his hand to make certain of the church." And this is actually Herod the Great's grandson. If you go through the scriptures, you'll find that. So he's Herod the Great's grandson, and what he does is he tries to persecute or to hurt certain people in the church. He's trying to stop the church, is essentially what he's doing. Or trying to, to really put a lot of problems out for the church. And it continues on and it says, "And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword." So literally, you got to think about this. We in America think that, killing someone with an injection and putting them to sleep and they don't really feel anything, we think that's bad. Well, you got to think, he had actually killed James, the brother of John, here with the sword. So this is a very graphic killing that he does here. And if you think about this, this isn't James that wrote the book of James. This isn't Christ's half-brother. This is Peter, James, and John James. This is one of the top three in the church at this point. And you got to think when he killed them how big that must have been to the church at this time. So that would cause a lot of, you can think, can you imagine if, we saw what recently happened with this church down in Bradenton. How many of you saw on the news what happened down there? Where, the pastor was killed and everything in the church. You could just imagine how this really affected the church, because this is one of the top three in the church at that point. And at this point, it's only 43 years, 45 years after Christ had died. So the church was really just getting started. It wasn't really that big like it is nowadays. So to do this was actually a big impact for the church. And so Herod thought that he was going to really do something against the church, and he was going to start vexing these big people or these big wigs in the church, and that's what his plan was. Little did he know. And so it says in verse 3, and because he saw that this pleased the Jews, he realized something. Hey, wait a second. When I killed James, this was huge. I just need to keep doing this because this is, making them happy. And if you think, would you be friends with Herod? So the Jews really weren't they weren't big friends with Herod at this point. So he thought, well, hey, look at this. This really struck a nerve with these people, and they really like this. I think I'm going to pursue this further. So he saw that it pleased the Jews, and he proceeded further to take Peter also. Now, who were the top three? Peter, James, and John. Now he's got the number one man, basically, if you want to think of it that way. He's got Peter. He's got the big guy in the church, and this is one of the top two. So it says, and when he saw it pleased them, he took Peter also. And then it says there in parentheses, if you look at it, then were the days of the unleavened bread or the Passover. So now the Passover is going on. And during the Passover, this was a very sacred time for all the Jews. And so they didn't really want to do anything at this point, so we're going to look further in the scripture and see what he says. And it says in verse 4, and when he had apprehended him, he put him into prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter and the Passover and all this to bring him forth to the people. Why was he going to bring him forth to the people? What did he do to the other one? He was going to bring him forth with the sword, and now he's going to slay another one, and he thought, I'm going to bring a second person out, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm really going to make a big impact. The Jews will really love me after this, and I think this is going to be awesome. So he takes Peter, and he puts him with these 4 quaternions of soldiers. What's a quaternion? Well, quattro is 4. 4 groups of 4 soldiers. Why did he put so many soldiers on Peter? Think back. What's in Acts chapter 4? And then again in Acts chapter 5. Peter would get thrown in prison and he'd get himself back out. He was like, it was just this amazing thing that would happen. He just couldn't keep him in prison. So Herod says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to vex the church. He'll be the second one. This will be huge. The people are really going to be happy about this. So what I'm going to do is, to make sure he don't get out, is I'm going to put 16 soldiers under the care of this guy. So this way, there's no way he's getting out this time. There's just no way he's going to be able to get out of this. And little does he know. So verse 5 says, Peter therefore was kept in prison, but, what's the next word? Prayer. Was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. So the church basically at this point, they say, hey, it's time for a prayer meeting. We need to get everyone here. Have you ever seen the prayer meetings where you have a sheet and you sign up and you pray for an hour, and when you're done you call someone and they pray for an hour? Well, it's kind of like that, except the only difference is the whole church meets up. The whole entire church, and they're just praying nonstop. And I don't even know if they even slept at this point, because it doesn't say. It just says that the whole church is praying nonstop. And we're going to see that it wasn't just a few. There was a bunch of them. So they're all praying nonstop for Peter at this point. Do you realize how much power there is in prayer? Even when you're going through a hard time and you think, hey, this is rough, after the Passover is done and after Easter's over, it's over for me. Well, let's continue looking, because it's kind of interesting what happens. It says in verse 6, and when Herod would have brought him forth, the same night, Peter was sleeping. Peter was sleeping. This is kind of interesting that he's sleeping here when it says here, the night that Herod was going to bring him forth. And Peter is sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. So here's Peter at this point. He's got 16 soldiers around him. 2 of them are chained to him. And he's out like a light. He is out like a light. He's not even concerned at all about all this going to take place. Now, I don't know about you, but I know for me, and I'm saying even as a pastor, for me, if I knew that the next day someone was about to lop my head off, I don't think I'd be sleeping that much that night. I just don't think so. I don't think that would be an easy thing. But for Peter here, he realized that God was so big and so powerful and so in control that even if his head was taken off from him, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Because God was going to take him home. But he did know one thing for sure, that unless God said it was going to happen, it wasn't going to happen. And God was in control, and he realized this. And in verse 7 it says, "And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison, and he smote Peter on the side." Now, if you go back and you look at this, and you start to study this in the Strong's Concordance, it's talking about literally hit it. So an angel comes up to him and goes, "Peter, get up!" And that's literally what happens. And it says there, if you continue looking, and he smote him on the side and raised him up, saying, "Arise up quickly." And his chains fell off from his hands. Now you've got 16 guards sitting there with this guy, and we're going to look here in a second of what's really going to take place. But his chains fell off of his hands. Now, when you look at this, you say, "Oh, that's such a great story. That's an amazing story. That's so wonderful. And we can teach this to our kids, and our kids will like this, and they'll grow up learning all these good, fancy stories, right?" An angel really came down in prison and smacked him on the side, and his chains fell off. I got news for you. Because as I was looking at this, all of a sudden something crept into my mind, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go look at this. Did you know the Red Sea is a mile deep? Did you know that? In the area where they would have had to cross, in order to make all the history books correct, because the history books prove that there was chariots, and there are still axles from these chariots and tire and like the wheels, the gold off the wheels. Now, the wood's all gone. The wood is completely gone. But they had gold wrapped around it. The gold is still there. And did you know there's fossils of human bones that they have been able, because of the gold wrapped around them, to relay back that these people were pharaohs or people of Pharaoh's people. They were royalty, and they found them. And they found bones of horses in the same location. Okay, I don't know about you, but I don't know why horses and chariots and people just ride across the Red Sea. They don't. And here's the amazing thing. If you think about this, the Red Sea parted. Now, here's another thing. They got to looking at the Red Sea, and they were like, well, if you drain the Red Sea, really you can't even cross it. Because if you try to cross the Red Sea, it's so steep that you wouldn't even really be able to get down in there. But if you did, you'd never be able to get back up the other side. Except in one place. If the water were to be drained, there's this place that's a gradual slope that goes across, and the scriptures say that there is a pathway lying under the water. God knew years before they ever got there that they were eventually going to be at this place. And just on the other side of this is bones of human and horses and chariots and pieces and all this stuff. So here's the thing. If the scripture can be proven that this really did take place, that the Red Sea parted, and that it came back together after people crossed the Red Sea, and only the Pharaoh's army and none of the other people were ever be able to be confirmed that were there as well, then I think a little pair of chains can fall off somebody's hands. And I think an angel of the Lord can definitely show up. And it's just amazing, because if you go online and start to research this, it's amazing to see all the proof that the Red Sea actually did part and this all did occur. So if the Red Sea parted and God could part the Red Sea and he could make a certain group of people cross it and all of a sudden it comes back together, I am quite certain that God is in control enough to send an angel to take care of this. But let's continue looking, because I think we're going to see something else. It says in verse 8, and it says, "And the angel said unto him, Gird yourself, get your clothes on, and bind on your sandals." Get your shoes on. And he said unto him, and so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garments about thee and follow me. So then he says, they used to wear a cloak. So he goes, get your clothes on, get your sandals on, throw your cloak around, and let's go. We don't have a lot of time. This is something that's urgent. We need to get out of here. We need to get out of prison. I've been sent forth to bring you right out of the prison. How awesome is that? So it says in verse 9, "And he went out and followed him, and wist not that it was true, which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision." So here Peter, when this all is taking place, Peter says, this can't be. This can't be. He wakes up from this sleep. And obviously he was in a pretty good sleep, because the angel snapped him on the side and said, let's get up, let's go. And Peter starts walking out of this prison, and he's like, this just can't even be possible. I got this angel beside me walking me literally out of this prison. This is amazing. This is not something you see every day. And Peter strong man of faith, and we're going to see that here in a second. And even with all of his faith, he was still thinking, I'm still asleep. I'm still dreaming. This cannot be real. Tomorrow morning, my head's going to be laying on a platter somewhere or something. But he goes on. So it says in verse 10, and when they were past the first and the second ward, or the first and second groups of these guards around them, that they came into the iron gate which leadeth unto the city, which opened unto them of his own accord, and they went out and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. So they literally walked past the first row of guards, and past the second row of guards, and then they get to the gatekeeper, and the gate just springs open. And the angel looks at him, probably, I don't know, but he probably looks at him and says, hey, you see that first street right there? I'm going to walk with you to the other side of that first street. When we cross that first street, you're on your own, buddy. I'm gone. I'm out of here. You're on your own. So the angel literally walks him out. Now the gate springs open on its own accord. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine for a moment how powerful God really is in this circumstance? You're thinking, we think, oh, we're in a terrible situation. It's such a bad situation. Have you ever known for sure that your head was coming off the next day? Have you ever known that? Peter knew that. And he also knew that God was in control. So when we're facing hard times and we're facing things that we think, God, this is the final hour, this is it, this is the last moment, trust me, God knows that he's got it all on his calendar. He knows exactly the right time. So they passed through, and then when they passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel leaves him, and when Peter was come to himself, when he finally wakes up fully and gets out of his groggy state, he's like, whoa, this really did happen. So when Peter finally comes to himself and he's all alert, he said, now I know of a surety that the Lord had sent his angel and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod. Stop there for a second, because the next part's even better. So Peter doesn't say he delivered me out of the prison. He doesn't say he delivered me out of anything else. He said he delivered me out of the hand of Herod. He had delivered him out of the hand of the king himself. He had literally basically made a pardon for him. Now, they were going to come looking for him. But, at this point, they had completely delivered him out of all this that was going on. Now, look at the next part. And from all the expectation of the Jews. Who are the Jews? God's chosen people. They're the Christians. They're the ones that have been around God the most. They're the ones that have experienced God the most of anyone. So who should have more faith? They should have the most amount of faith. He said he had delivered them beyond the expectation of the people of the Jews. The people that are praying, the church, the group that's sitting there praying for him and supposed to have all this faith, God had delivered them even beyond their expectations, to the point that they didn't even have enough faith to believe that God was going to deliver him from Herod. Can you imagine that? The president comes down here, takes me, locks me up, throws me in prison, and God walks me out the gate. How many of you would believe that if you were in the prayer meeting tonight? Seriously, that's where they were. The king had literally taken this guy, made him captive, stuck 16 soldiers next to him, 2 chained to him, and Peter still walks out beyond the faith or beyond the expectation of the entire Jewish people. And Peter made that statement. And he realized that God was certainly in control, and God had just completely delivered him. And it says in verse 12, and when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, and where many were gathered together praying. Here's the prayer. So Peter, when he gets delivered, he goes first to the place where this prayer meeting is going on. And he comes up and he gets to this prayer meeting, and it's amazing what takes place now. It says, and as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel or a young girl came to hearken, named Rhoda. How many of you guys remember this story? What's going to come to happen? So Rhoda comes, this young girl, and she comes up to the gate and she hears this knocking. Now, I don't know about you, but if you just escaped from a prison, and God walked you out of it, however you got out of it, and you go banging on a door that's not that far away, I don't think I'd stand there and bang very long. I don't think I'd bang very loud. But he bangs on this door. What happens when you bang on a door late at night? A couple dogs start barking, right? And then lights flip on, and everybody's looking out at you. And Peter's got to be quiet, because if he's too loud, what's going to happen? They're get the sheriff down here, right? So all of a sudden they realize that this girl hears this knocking, and right away she came to see what's going on, and it says in verse 14, and she knew Peter's voice. So right away she hears Peter, and she knows immediately it's Peter's voice. And so she opened not the gate for gladness. She's so excited, she's like, Peter's out, Peter's out. She turns around, starts running off, and Peter's probably like, shh, quiet down, knock it out. You gotta be quiet. So out of her excitement, she ran, right? So she runs, she's so excited, and she ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. And in verse 15 it says, and they said unto her, you're mad. Thou art mad. There's no way, you're crazy. Peter's not standing at the gate. Now don't disturb us. We're having a prayer meeting. Now go back out there and watch the gate. Right? So this is literally what they're doing. These people are praying and praying and praying feverishly without stopping, without ceasing. When it happens, don't believe it. You're mad. You're a mad girl. You're just a girl. You don't know what you're talking about. But she consistently affirmed that it was even so. Then said they, it is his angel.
Well, let the angel in.
Oh, he's already gone. He's already dead. They've already lopped this guy's head off. It's not even him out there. It's probably just his ghost that's just out there talking to you. Just go back out there. You're mad. No, who's the mad one? Who's the one saying it's his ghost? So really, in all reality, they're saying, we don't believe you. We don't have the faith to believe you. What did Peter just say? That God delivered them beyond the expectation of the church. How amazing is that? But Peter, come on, people, they're going to hear me. He continues to knock, and he's probably sitting there thinking, knock this off. And when they had opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. When they opened the door and they see Peter standing there like, how'd you get out? What happened? How in the world did you get out? And I can only imagine what Peter was probably thinking. Well, God brought me out, of course, an angel. I'm not going to kill all the soldiers wrapped around me and chained to me and everything else. But he beckoned unto them with his hand to hold their peace. He's like, shh, get off, quiet. If you guys are making so much excitement, you want me to go back? You just prayed me out, now you want me to go back? Seriously? Is that what you're thinking? So he beckons with his hand, not even speaking words, like, shh, be quiet. And declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, go show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. So he takes off as soon as this happens. Now, what do you think the king's thinking right now? When he shows up, especially first thing in the morning. Well, let's find out. So Peter takes off and he goes to another place. And here it says now in verse 18, now as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers. What does this mean?
They're scared.
They're scared. They're going everywhere. There was no small stir. That means they were all over the place. They're tearing this prison up looking for this guy. And they were looking all over the place. Why were they looking for him? What was the punishment?
Death, yeah.
Your punishment was the same as whoever you were supposed to be watching. And they knew this. So if their punishment was death, so was yours. And it says there was no small stir among the soldiers of what was become of Peter. So they're looking for him everywhere. Verse 19. Now when Herod had sought for him, wait a second, had what? Sought for him. Herod's an insecure guy. This guy comes to the prison and his guards say, hey, he's not here. And Herod, clothed in all of his royal garment, goes down in the prison. Now, think about this. Can you imagine a king or a president or anything like that going into a prison of today and searching for someone? Now think of the prison that they had. You didn't have running water, you didn't have toilets, anything like that, so you dug little pits in the inside there and everything else. So these places had rats and mice and all this kind of stuff and disease and all this. And the king is so upset that now Peter is gone and he realizes, man, these people are really going to hate me now. They hated me before and they kind of got excited when I finally killed this one. Now they're going to be really upset. So he goes and searches for him himself and goes all over the place looking for him. And when he found him not, verse 19, he examined the keepers and he said, all of them, hey, all of you that were supposed to guard him, get over here right now. Where is Peter? We don't know, he's gone. Where is Peter? Bring him here now. We can't. He's gone. In verse 19 it says, and he demanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea into Caesarea, and there abode. Now, if you look at this, I don't know that this is true. I'm going out on a limb here, but he went down from Judea, which was an inner city, to a coastal city in Caesarea, and there abode. Probably beachfront property. The king probably, in some Bibles and some scriptures, it actually says he went on vacation. Now, I tried to look this up in the Strong's Concordance, and it says he went for his own pleasure, but it doesn't really say specifically what he did. But obviously, it must have been a vacation home or something like that. So he goes down to this other place. He's so upset. Now, he's like, I can't even be seen around here. You guys can't even keep Peter? Are you serious? 16 of you plus a gatekeeper, and you can't even watch this guy, and he walks out? Does he know who God really is? Have we really embraced who God really is? So, he takes off and goes to his little beachfront property in Caesarea, and there he abode, and there he takes his little vacation. Now, this is interesting what takes place now. It says in verse 20, and Herod was highly displeased with them of Tyre and Sidon. He's so upset. He's like, man, this is just crazy. So he's all upset with them. But when they came in one accord unto him, and having made who? Blastus. Can you imagine that name? I can't even imagine the name. Who wants to name their kid Blastus? Anybody have kids anytime around? So they go and they find this guy Blastus, the king's chamberlain. Now, I don't understand why it doesn't say this. It should say this, but really it's his calendar keeper. Or it's his person that handles all the scheduling, right? His chamberlain. So they go and what do they do with him? They make him their friend. So they say, well, if we can't get to the king because he's so mad at us and he just absolutely hates us right now, what we'll do is we'll just go get his calendar person. How many of you guys have kids in here? Stephanie does this every now and then. She hasn't done it so much lately. But have you ever had them go to mommy and say, hey, mommy, can I have this? No. Hey, daddy. Go around the corner, right? And then mommy comes flying around the corner. I just told you no. You know? So what happens is they know they can't get to the king because the king's like, doesn't even want to talk to him right now. He's so mad. He's just like upset. And so they're like, well, I'll go find his calendar person, the one that keeps his calendar, and we'll get a date with this king, and we'll make him our friend because we can't get to the king. So what they do is they go find his calendar keeper, and they say, hey, we want you to be our friend. We'll pay you. We'll do whatever. You know? So they finally get him to be their friend, or whatever they got to do. And it says, because their countenance was nourished by the king of this country, so the king was the one that was supplying them, so they knew they had to make him their friend so they could get back on the king's good side. And it says in verse 21, and upon a set day, so they finally got on his calendar. Finally they had got to this point. You know, they got with Blastus and they said, hey, can you set a date for us to meet with them? And finally on a set day, Herod, arrayed in all his royal apparel, sat upon his throne and made a oration unto them. What's an oration? What's an orator? A great speaker, right? So he comes out and he makes his presidential address, you know, in all his fancy clothes and this big garb and all this stuff. And this is proven in scripture as well. I mean, proven in history. There's all kinds of books that talk about it. You can read up on it. But he comes out in all of his fine, dress clothes and all this stuff. And it's amazing. And he makes his big speech to them. And when he's done, it says, and the people gave a shout saying, it is the voice of a God and not of a man. Now, can you imagine? You're the king, right? And these people are mad. You're mad at them. You don't even want to talk to them. But these people, try to be your friend and everything. So they get you out there and then they start stroking your ego, right? Hey, this is the voice of a God and not a man. Tisha was sitting here goofing off earlier. She's like, oh. And I was like, no, don't do that. Because we're going to find out what happens to the kings and things that do that. So they come out and he says, they say this to him. And obviously it went to his head. It obviously sunk into this guy. And because his king obviously took glory in it. Because the next couple verses, we're going to see what happens. And this people gave a shout, it was the voice of a God and not a man. And immediately the angel of the Lord smote him because he gave not God the glory. So he must have taken the glory upon himself and not said anything about God. And he was eaten of worms and gave up the ghost. God is in control. Even when you're in prison and you think it's the final moment, you're crying out and all this kind of stuff, God is still in control. And when this king was standing there and he gave this big speech and he thought he was everything to the world and everything owed him something, God thought just a little bit differently. And I will tell you something, Does an angel move without God telling it to? So who effectively smote this man? God did. The angel of the Lord smote him because he gave not God the glory. Just think about this for a second. If you want to talk about God being in control, you think it's amazing that he walked a person out of a prison? This right here is absolutely amazing. The person that Peter was afraid of at this point, and the person that Peter said God had delivered him from, now, just because he thought he was a God that took the glory away from God, God smote him and told the angel, and the angel smote him right there on the spot. In verse 24, the most important verse of this whole thing, but the word of God grew and multiplied. It doesn't matter what goes on. Now, the last verse there, 25, it just says that Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their ministry and took with them John, whose surname was Mark. So I just wanted to wrap that up and read the whole thing. But we don't really need to. We could stop right there in 24. The word of God grew and multiplied. This king, think about this for a second. What was this king trying to do? He was trying to stop prayer in schools. He was trying to do all these different things to vex certain people of the church. Essentially, this king was trying to kill the people. But when you go against God and you start to go against God and you start to do things that are not godly, just think, God is in control. And he knows everything, and he sees everything, and he knows exactly what's going on. And when we think our calendar is so important and what we have going on, and how many of you have ever sat there and prayed, God, this is the 12th hour. This is the final hour. This is it. I can't believe it. You know, and then 3 weeks later, God finally says, okay, it's time. Now it delivers you. And then he delivers you. And it was the perfect time. Just because sometimes we think our calendar needs to match God's doesn't mean God's needs to match yours. When we're going through struggles and we're facing things, all we need to remember is one thing for certain. Go sleep. Just lay down, relax, quit worrying, because God is absolutely in control. Go home tonight, and I challenge you to do this. Start looking up some of these stories in the scriptures and start looking for proof. Did this really occur? Did the Red Sea really part? How can I know? Does the history prove it? Now, people have tried to prove that the Red Sea did not part. And in the process of trying to prove that the Red Sea did not part, proved that it did. And they proved that all of a sudden, because I don't know about you, but if it was me, I could see maybe a horse or a chariot falling into the water by accident if it's traveling too close to the edge of it. But I can't see a whole herd of it. And I can't see the amount of bones and all this kind of stuff. And so history, when they try to prove these things, all of a sudden start to realize, hold on a second. This had to occur. And if you look at the way the water would have been traveling, the bones should have been on this side. Oh, that's where they are. And it's amazing. Because God can walk into a prison and release people. If he can do that, he can certainly show up in all of our circumstances and take care of us. Do you have a bed that you can sleep in? Do you have water running and electricity and a shower in the morning and a roof over your head? We've got a lot of things to be thankful for. Our head's not on a platter the next day. Peter's head was on a platter the next day, and yes, we go through some circumstances, and I'm not trying to make light of that. I'm sure there's a lot of pain represented in this room from some different things and all these things we've been through. But I can tell you one thing with 100% certainty, it's hard. Sometimes it's difficult even for me to lay down in bed and go, oh, the parade will be fine, everything's going to be okay, I don't even need to worry about it, God's in control. You know, sometimes I have to keep telling myself this stuff. But we need to constantly be telling ourselves that God is absolutely in control. When we look at the things that he's done in the past, God is the same yesterday, as he is today, as he will be tomorrow. So when we start to look at these things, it was amazing to me as I started to pull this apart. And you want to know something, this is amazing. I'm sure this is going to be touching some people close today. But the thing is, this was prepared a week and a half ago. And this is so real to some people sitting here today. God is absolutely in control and knows exactly what he's doing. And when you call me on the phone and you say, I need deliverance, I can tell you one way you can get it. Just constantly put your faith in God and trust in God. Let's pray.